Hello, everyone. My name is Deepak Mishra, and thanks to ORF for organizing the session. We are really delighted to be part of this show. Let me begin by saying, if I tell you everything you learned about digitalization is wrong, or if not everything, a lot of it that you learned about digitalization is wrong, would you believe me? I'm going to prove to you today through this 10 minutes talk that the way we measure digitalization, and digitalization is about using digital technologies for everyday use in our life, the way we measure digitalization is all wrong. And we need to think of, especially when you look from a global south perspective. And that's what we're going to do today. Can I start the presentation, guys? Okay. So I'll take you back to the India G20 summit. So when the India G20 events were happening, what the government did was when the foreign delegates would come to India, they facilitated a way for them to download a digital payment app called UPI, Unified Payment Interface, so that the foreign delegates don't have to use cash to do their transaction. They can go, use the mobile phone, open the app, and make those payments. It was a big hit. A lot of foreign delegates used it. The Indian newspapers and TV channels put out those pictures showing how the foreign delegates were so impressed. But many Indians wondered, why are they so impressed? This is a technology that's being used by 330 million Indians. It's part of everyday's life. Why is it such impressive things for especially people who come from richer countries who should have seen this kind of technology? And that's because the average Indian has seen the rapid progress of digitalization over the last 20 years, and especially post-COVID period. So today, India is the second largest mobile subscriber in the world, number 3 in terms of data usage, number 1 in terms of speed of 5G deployment, of course, from a very low base, number 2 in terms of digital identity, number 1 in terms of volume of UPI transaction, not the value, but just the sheer volume of the transaction, and so on and so forth, home to the third largest number of unicorns in the world. And the picture that you show is how it's happening. A lot of it is happening through what we call digital public infrastructure. So these are the ports and the roads and the infrastructure of the digital age. And there is a DPI for everything you go in India, from agriculture to education to health to finance. And the picture that shows you the size of the rectangle is the number of subscribers. So the larger is the rectangle size, more people are using it. And the growth rate between 2022 and 23 has been pretty high, in some cases growing at 20, 30, 40% over the year. So this is from a high base of 200, 300 or a billion people using it, and on top of it, much higher growth. So Indians have started to get used to this very fast pace of digitalization. So they're clearly very surprised as to why are people thinking about things that they are using in their everyday life, and surprised about it. If you dig a little deeper into this, you realize that a lot of the perception about digitalization comes from some very credible source of how digitalization is measured. And I'm going to cite you 3 of those sources. The left one is the United Nations ranking of digitalization. The middle one is World Economic Forum. And the one on the right is the one from ITU, International Telecommunication Union. If you look at those pictures, and the y-axis is the ranking or the score on the digitalization, the x-axis is the per capita income. You see this very strong positive upward sloping lines, which basically means the richer you are, the more digitalized you are. So India is a country with $3,000 per capita income, or even less than that. So clearly you would not expect anything great happening in a relatively poor country. But this is happening primarily because while digital technologies have made dramatic progress, the way we measure digitalization has barely changed in the last 30 years. So what we do is we go and propose and think about what are the real limitations of the current indices on global, which are measuring digitalization. So there are 3 big limitations of those indices. The first is that many of those index measures a very narrow notion of what is digitalization. This is what, so those of you who are of my age or older than me would remember in the 1990s when internet and digital technology started to proliferate in the north, this was happening largely through fixed broadband. And this was most people access it through a laptop or a desktop. And that was the way you connect everywhere to internet. Today, if you go to a country in global south, it's mostly the mobile that people get to internet through a mobile phone or a smartphone. They do not have the same style, the pace, and the nature of digitalization has become very different. In my country, in India, where millions of people do not have a smartphone and do not have access to internet and reliable internet, could still use and get the benefit of digital technology through fiscal transfer without many of the things. So they're not really connected in the way we think about connected, but they are getting the benefits of it. So if you're really wanting to think about what digitalization is, you've got to measure the entire spectrum of digitalization, which is what we do. We propose a framework called CHIPS. C is for connect. How do you connect these billions of people, the government agencies, and the businesses to the internet at an affordable price and make it universally accessible? Second is, once you connect people, what do you do with them? How do you harness those technology for generating growth, creating jobs, improving service delivery? The third is innovation. How are you pushing your digital economy to become innovate over time? Fourth, protection, very important. How are you protecting your citizens, your businesses from cybersecurity, loss of privacy, and all sorts of downside risks from digitalization? Fifth, sustainability. How green is your digital economy? So we expand the whole concept of what digitalization means to today's time compared to a lot of the global indexes which were created in 1990, 2001, 2003, and haven't had the privilege and the hindsight of thinking of a full spectrum. The second big limitation that you correct here is that many of the global indices look at digitalization at the level of user, but they miss out completely the network effect. To give you an example, India has 900 million internet users. Fiji has 0.9 million. But if you look at it as a percentage of population, India has 60% population on the internet and Fiji has 70%. So in the global indicators, Fiji would get a higher score. Fiji will be considered more digitalized than India just because they have a larger percentage of population who are internet, even if the population is tiny. And we think you need to do both. You need to look at what is the size of the economy, a digital economy, as well as the user experience. So what we do is we create two indices, one for the economy and one for the user. Think of GDP versus GDP per capita. Today, if you want to reconstruct G20, so today G20 countries are based on the GDP of the economy. The larger the size of the GDP, the more likelihood that you are in the part of the G20. If you go back and create G20 based on per capita income, which countries would be part of it? It will be most likely Bahrain or Qatar, or some of the very wealthier countries could be tiny, but per capita income. So it will be a very different concept of what is per capita versus what is GDP. We do both to see how it changes the picture. The third point that the global indices miss out is they suffer from something we call the double counting. They measure both the output and the inputs. And that makes it, for the poor countries who have low internet penetration, as well as poor infrastructure, it gets counted twice. So you actually get a double penalty. We correct for that. So once you do that, what happens? So we take these 5 pillars. Each pillar has a bunch of sub-pillars. So connectivity has 3 sub-pillars called access, quality, and affordability. So you want to see how accessible is your internet, what's the quality of the internet, the download speed, how affordable is the internet. So behind each sub-pillar, there are a bunch of indicators. So you end up with 50 indicators. And you can see the 5 pillars, they're all there. 50 might look like a large number. It's actually pretty parsimonious compared to some of the other global indices who use both input and output. So the World Economic Forum will actually produce a number which is based on perhaps 300 indicators. So it's not actually a very large model. It's only 50 indicators, 16 sub-pillars, 5 pillars. And when I said the way we correct for the GDP and per capita GDP is we create 2 indicators, one called CHIPS economy, one we call CHIPS user. So the economy is the equivalent of the GDP. What's the total aggregate size of your digital economy? User is what's the average experience of the digital user. Both are important. And you got to look at both and not just one of it. And this just shows you some of the technical details which I'm going to pass over. So once you do that, what do you find? You find dramatically different results. So India, which was ranked pretty much at the bottom of the percentile when you look at some of the global indicators, turns out to be the third most digitalized country in the world, or at least among the G20, and 12th most in terms of the average user. That's a pretty dramatic increase from the rest of the world. Sorry, I haven't shown you the picture. So that's the ranking. So you get US, China, India, followed by many countries. And when it comes to average, so the way to look at it is the left picture is the equivalent of the GDP or the chips aggregate. The right side, the chip per user, which is what the traditional measures of global indices will show you. And there's a very big difference. But you might think, is this a report that was prepared by a bunch of Indians sitting in Delhi trying to promote the India case? What I'm going to show you, this is a story of all or most countries in the global south. So clearly this is not an India story. This is a global story or a global south story. So if you look at China, by per capita user basis, they would have been ranked 6th. At aggregate level, they will be ranked 2. India ranks increased by 8. Indonesia, and I know there are a couple of delegates from Indonesia, that's the biggest beneficiary of the new alternative you're looking at. Their rank goes up by 11. From bottom of the pile to 8th. South Africa gains 1 point in ranking, Brazil gets 1 point in ranking, Mexico increases. So pretty much all global south large economies gain at the cost of the global north. So this is a very different way of measuring digitalization than what you have ever seen or studied and read in newspaper and magazine. If I look at, and I kind of unbox the chips to different pillars, you can see how the scores are adding up. South Africa does pretty well in Connect, not so bad in Harness, pretty low on innovation, and when we have the Q&A and the panel session, we'll discuss a little bit why a lot of the countries in Global South fall behind on that. And look at Indonesia. Indonesia does pretty well in terms of protect and sustainability. It does pretty well in Harness. In fact, Indonesia does better than South Korea, Canada, Mexico, Italy. South Africa does better than Saudi Arabia. So there's a lot of different changes that happens once you start looking at the full spectrum of digitalization. But I want you to take away 2 messages. First is, there is no global conspiracy against Global South to hold this thing. So this is not that someone consciously aware about what should have been done. This is more intellectual inertia. People who are doing these indices haven't really thought, haven't spent enough time thinking about how digitalization is spreading in Global South. And second important point is, while at an aggregate level, that's a picture, the one that I showed you before, the developing countries are doing well, but at a average user level, there's still a long way to go. So you can see a lot of the countries, once you start to look at the average user, we are still falling behind quite a bit. So there's a reason to look at both, and you can't be looking at one. So let me conclude by saying that ranking of countries in Global South will significantly improve if the full scope and spectrum of digitalization is taken into account. And that's because, first point, digitalization has made dramatic progress over the last 2 to 3 decades, but the way we are measuring digitalization hasn't changed, and we really need to look at this. Using a new approach, and dare I say a better approach, of connect, harness, innovate, protect, and sustain, the CHIPS framework that I put forward, will lead to a very different outcome. For a country like India, we'll come out as the 3rd most digitalized country in the world and 12th most digitalized at the average user level among the G20 country. But this is not an India story. This is a story of the Global South. Most large countries in Global South are likely to see much higher level of digitalization if you do not use the traditional but use the more alternate method of measuring digitalization. So what's my message to the global organization who are preparing global indices? They should provide both the measures, the aggregate and the average user, to obtain a complete picture of country's digitalization. Otherwise, you're providing a incomplete, false, and sometimes incorrect information about how the world is digitalizing. Thank you for your attention. I just wanted to start by saying that we have this fabulous set of two speakers here with very diverse and interesting experience. And I'll start off by just telling them how they are, in terms of their professional work they're doing and how that relates to a lot of the things we just talked about. That there is so a lot of developing countries have gone beyond connect. So even if there is still small percentage of people who are not connected, but there's a large percentage, majority of people in developing countries are now on the internet, and they are using internet in a very exciting way. And two of our speakers here have lived in experience of promoting those. So I'll request first to start with Mary Lou in terms of what her company is doing to get students and young adults to become more creative using digital technology. So can I start with you, please?
Thank you. Can I have the picture? Yeah. Hopefully we'll have a glimpse to TUMO in Armenia. So I'm Mary Lou Papazyan. I'm the founding CEO of the TUMO Center for Creative Technologies. Some years ago, in 2011, we opened the doors. We opened the doors of this center imagining some 1,000 students will come, and we are now up to 15,000 in Yerevan, and we have opened other centers in Armenia, and we're expanding internationally. What we do is very simple. We focus on teenagers. This is an after-school program free of charge, where the students are in charge of their own learning plan. We teach skills in 14 different areas, ranging from coding to animation to game development to creative writing, music, photography, film. But the most important is, yes, we teach skills, we teach Python, we teach Photoshop, but that's only a mean, not the goal. For us, it's very important to teach the soft skills and to foster on the digital literacy and the AI literacy. So we're now adding a skill area in AI, infusing AI in every of our skill areas, so our teenagers will be ready for the future, and they will be ready to embrace and adapt to everything that is already happening very fast. My point is, focusing on teenagers is very important. Yes, we can measure the digital divide, or we can measure the digitalization of a country, but maybe it is very important also to think about the future and to think about the capacity that this teenager can have in the very near future, and to see what they're up to, because they are going to be the ones that are going to change completely the landscape very soon.
Thank you, Mary Lou. Let me turn to Deltitus, who is actually doing some of the most fascinating, innovative work in Africa in terms of developing Web 3.0. So I'd first like to tell us a little bit about the innovation pillar that you heard in the report, in terms of how the work you're doing from Africa point of view, how they're adding up and pushing Africa on the innovation frontier.
Okay, thank you, Deepak. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to all for putting this amazing conference together, and all the other sponsors for contributing, including a big thanks to Your Excellency, President Thabo Mbeki and his foundation. So I put two hats on. For Africa, the focus is Web3. And so I'm the founder and CEO of Web3 Africa Group. And essentially our focus is to develop the infrastructure surrounding Web3. For those of you who are not so familiar with Web3, the basis of it is the blockchain. And as a consequence of that, you have AI, you have cryptocurrencies, you have DeFi, which is short for decentralized finance, and then you also have gaming. Ghana is the hub that we are starting from, looking at 10 other markets, including South Africa. So far, our three main pillars have been education, policy, and commercialization. With Ghana, we've worked very closely with the central bank in the last 2 years to establish their policy framework for digital assets, with the first draft of the policy that has been announced and made public as of 4 months ago with the central bank, the BOG. In addition to this, we have partnered with an AI startup, which is led by ex-Oracle solutions architect. And then we've also taken a 50% position in a cryptocurrency exchange by the name of Telos, which is a subsidiary sister company to Binance. Now, the work that we're doing, we're basically focusing on this area regarding Web3 is because we essentially feel that Africa's GDP is underperforming, and we see a very, very, very big opportunity in Africa's GDP accelerating through Web3. So if you look in the last 10 years alone, well, actually, something that's probably a bit more closer to you guys is the 4 or the 5 main tech companies globally, the established ones, right, have reached a market cap of $1 trillion, give or take 20 years, right? Now, if you look at one cryptocurrency alone, that has managed to hit the $1 trillion market cap, Bitcoin to be specific, in less than 10 years, or give or take 10 years. And so you start to see an opportunity for Africa where, you know, with the mobile penetration, with the digital asset space and its benefits from everything from OTC, being able to move money intercontinentally, we see a massive advantage there. And our job effectively is to contribute in developing the infrastructure for that, so that Africa has an amazing and very, very good advantage in the future in terms of how it increases its GDP going forwards.
Thank you. Let me give you a situation or a context to you before I ask the questions. And while I ask the question, I should ask the folks on the audience, if you have any question, do think about it, and I'll come very soon to you to ask some questions to the panelists. So Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, was in India a few months ago, and during a Q&A session, somebody asked him about the fact that should India be developing its generative AI and the infrastructure for it. And his response, very blunt response, was saying, I don't think India should be investing in Gen AI because it's very capital intensive, it's very expensive. What India should do is to actually use the generative AI that we are producing for better goods or betterment. And obviously this created a big debate in India because there are lots of policymakers and tech CEOs who believe that India should be investing in it. So the question to both of you, so both Armenia and Ghana and many countries in Africa, is there a danger that we might fall into the trap that Sam Altman is saying, that you are trying to go into emerging technology when you don't have the full foundation? You know, that we didn't even cover the people from the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution. So are we trying to leapfrog and we fall off the cliff? Or there are good reasons to believe that this time the story is different? Do you want to start off?
Yes, I think he's wrong. Yes, definitely. It is very important to leapfrog, and this is our opportunity. Otherwise, we'll miss the train and we'll be left behind. Definitely, it is essential to be ready and to be on top of it. And what I mean by that is not, trying to compete with OpenAI or try to be at the top of the curve and to have the same quality and of research and development, but to be ready to embrace it, to be ready to understand it, to be ready to incorporate it, to be ready to be in control of it, to be ready to innovate within those parameters. That is the most important. And for that, we have to be courageous. We just not have to fall behind being afraid and being suspicious, but that, no, in the contrary, to dare to be on top of it. I don't think it is difficult because there is a lot available and transparent. The fact that we create with AI or we create AI should happen at the same time. And this is what I mean, education is very important. And it's not something that, like a long time ago, it's not accessible. It is accessible. It's a matter of mindset. You have to change your mindset. You have to be courageous. You have to dare to, not, I don't mean by experimenting and taking risks, but you should not fear it. That's the main point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, similar to Mary, I also disagree with Sam Altman. And although, look, OpenAI is one of my favorite apps, you know, I use it. However, Sam Altman is also very he's the same person that said OpenAI was going to be a charity and now it's a commercial engine. So he has a tendency of changing his mind, right? So I think for Africa, I'm obviously very bullish. I would not subscribe to that. And I think that we should be strong and push, because similarly, you couldn't have Aliko Dangote go to America and say, oh, you should stop doing X, Y, Z. That would not happen, right? And so I think India in particular, you're in such an advantageous position with youth, with knowledge. And I just think that our actual new way of doing things should be developing entrepreneurs in our regions who have the ability to build competitive products, so that we'll be a lot more insightful about our data and our consumption, right? It should not be dictated by other companies. There's room to share, but I think fundamentally the global south should be in control of the kind of technology that we're developing.
So last round of question before I come to the audience. Role of the state or the role of the policymakers and the champions in this. So, I mean, in India, you know, currently we have a prime minister who is very keen on some of those things. So there's a lot of experimentation happening. But we also had policymakers who were very shy and very cautious about this. They were very worried that, you know, we don't have enough toilets for people. Why should we be investing on the internet? So there's a lot of debate, but eventually the role of the policymaker, it seemed, was pretty critical for this. So I wanted to ask you guys, in terms of what are the, do you feel the countries in your country are getting the enough support from policymakers? How critical are the policymakers in the overall story of digitalization of a country?
I don't want to criticize my government, but I was in a conversation lately with the Ministry of Education, and I would say I was a little bit shocked, because yes, sometimes the governments tend to, you know, exaggerate, or maybe not exaggerate, but fell in the trap that, oh, schools, we need to build schools, we need to have a better internet connection, we need to do this, and they lose the sight and they lose the vision. And they don't put a goal towards where they're going. It's saving or solving everyday problems that they're trapped in. I think we have the force to divert that and prove that at the same time you have to keep moving very fast and leapfrogging and having a vision and a goal and go towards that goal. That's the only way. And organizations, non-profit organizations, are there to always give a wake-up call to the government and help them, to support them, not go against them, support them to move forward faster than they expect.
So from my perspective, dealing with Ghana's institutions, mainly surrounding blockchain and digital assets, the central bank has been very supportive. You know, I'd be lying if I said they'd not been completely supportive of the vision that we have. The vice president has also been extremely supportive and championed digitalization in Ghana, at least the current vice president, I mean. And so my personal experience is very positive. However, I would say as a region, we need to be a lot more aggressive. And the reason why we need to be aggressive is not because we are necessarily copying what other regions are doing, but just because Africa's prosperity really, really, really is, you know, integrated and intertwined with the youth, right? And the youth are very, you know, they're digitally friendly, right? And so I feel like we need to be where the ball is going to be, not where the ball is. And so our leaders, we rely on their wisdom, of course, you know. The wisdom they have supersedes any kind of quick buck that we want to make. However, at the same time, it's very, very important that the leaders, they exhibit the boldness that we know they have to ensure that the creators, the founders feel confident enough to build things, right? Because Africa's destiny to prosperity, I believe, is strongly linked to digitalization, right? And one example I'll give is, like I said, the 4 tech companies in the US combined market cap north of $10 trillion. Our whole continent, the market cap is around, I'll be conservative, $3 trillion, right? We have almost 1.4 billion people here, 70% of the world's youth here. How is that possible? And then we have most of the world's resources here as well. The numbers do not make sense. And I understand we have bureaucracy, we have a lot of bureaucracy, but we have to be aggressive. The time has come to be aggressive and change Africa's fortunes, and that is going to happen once we embrace digitalization.
Thank you. So time has come to change Africa's fortune. That's a good way to cover our discussion. So can I see if there's any question from the audience? I see 2 hands over there, or one more. So could you please come? Yeah, so first you and the lady, and then the lady in the front.
My question is to Del Titos. Bhutan has, can you hear me?
Yes.
Bhutan has launched a digital ID program using blockchain. It is interesting the way you describe your company and your vision of using blockchain. I would like to hear about some specific work that you have done or any products or services, particular products that you have. Have you done any work related to digital ID on blockchain by chance? Or have you helped any government develop a central bank digital currency?
Okay, that's a good question. So I wear 2 hats. Should I? Oh, you want? Okay, right, sure. I will remember your question, yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your...
Would you like to introduce yourself, please, and the name?
Certainly. My name is Clara Bühlhoff. I'm from Germany, and I'm a little surprised how we came up so high on these rankings, because it often doesn't feel that we're that digitized. But I wanted to ask potentially all 3 of you. You spoke to, should we be developing generative AI on our own or not? And I wanted to ask a broader question about the role of tech in society. I think as we're talking about the global south and not missing the train, I think it's interesting to look at the US and the way that tech companies have become political actors. And I wonder, as people in the business, what your vision is for this in your own countries and in your own societies, and whether you could share that. Thank you.
Okay, good. Last one.
My name is Jena Basso. I am from the Gambia. I am the Public Relations Officer, Open Gambia Network. And my question goes to Del. So how do you see policy and regulation evolving in response to rapid digitization? What should policymakers focus to support to support sustainable digital growth in Africa? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I'll start with the last question and then I'll end with the gentleman's question. So the policymakers, as I mentioned, relating to Ghana, one of the things they've been doing is sandboxes. Now, I know that sounds very cliche, but that environment allows you to exhibit, right, your proof of concept in an environment that is safe, secure, and ultimately allows the institution to have enough oversight to see how they can basically roll something up into the public. And so that's been the experience I've had concerning blockchain and digital assets with my institution. I think that other governments could do similar. And what that does is when you signal sandboxes, particularly in industries that are seen to be a little bit risky, let's say blockchain and cryptocurrencies, what you're doing is you're sending a signal that we are open, but we are going to be responsible, right? And so that would be one example of how institutions could be progressive in that sense. I don't know if you do you want to add any comments to it before I ask? Okay, sure. And then for the first gentleman, yeah, that's a really good question. So yes, with the Ghanaian Central Bank, we've worked on the ECD, which has been, should I say, an experimental product that's been rolled out in rural areas of Ghana. There's a very interesting blog conversation between myself, the head of fintech for the central bank, and Ethereum, which is the second largest cryptocurrency in the world, around the use of potential CBDs. I know some people see them as weapons of mass destruction. I tend to differ, but that's a very interesting project that has been worked on. And then another thing that is currently being worked on pertaining to Ghana is a project around stablecoins, and basically trying to ascertain what kind of utility it can be backed against when you're talking specifically around Africa. Obviously, we have examples like USDT, which is backed against gold in the US. But in Africa, I think our issues are a bit different. And so we are currently investigating different ways this can be used. And then what I also mentioned is I happen to be the CEO for Telos Africa. That's a fully established crypto exchange and token market cap of about $100 million, $70 to $100 million as we speak. And we're currently in other markets, and we're going to be focusing on Africa next year, 10 markets, including South Africa being one of them. And then the other hat that I wear, which is more global, is I also happen to be the global chair for the United Nations Digital Climate Library, which is to move all the existing climate change documents in their archives onto a digital library and essentially on-chain. So those things keep me busy, but not busy enough to come to off. Thank you.
Can I just ask you the question from the lady who asked about the politicization of the tech? The fact that most of the American CEOs have jumped into the political bandwagon. Yeah. You being a tech leader in Africa, what's your view on that?
Yeah, so I think there's two sides to it, right? The one side is if the problem is big enough, then you will feel convicted to use your resources to make a statement, which we have seen with Elon Musk and Trump in the US. I pick no sides concerning that situation, but I think that the problem to Elon Musk, whatever it was obviously big enough. I think with Africa, I don't think we're in a place where digitalization needs to be weaponized. I think that we only have one path at the moment, and that path is that we need to solve our immediate problems with digitalization. So I don't even think as a leader, anyone who is a leader in the space that, has built anything successful should be thinking about how they're going to use those resources to influence politics, right? Because your first order of services, someone who's running a business here is to solve the immediate problems. You have real immediate problems. So I wouldn't go down the path of Elon, and I don't think anyone else should. But, you know, if you are going to do something, look at the problems in Africa directly and go and solve them. That would be my 2 cents.
Okay. Mary Lou, any reaction to any of the question?
I agree, because there are so many more benefits than going through that path, which is at the end, dead end.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit to the question on, does it feel like you are such a digitalized country? Is this some of the indicators that we have put together is biased that you don't feel? So I'll tell you, so I lived 22 years in Washington, DC, and last 3 years in Delhi. And my use of, my personal habit of using digital technology has manifold increase in Delhi, not because Delhi does a better job in supplying or India does better, but it's the alternate system, the analog doesn't work very well. So you're forced to be digitalized. So in a sense, it may be out of, you know, good supply or more demand. In the sense sometimes you are pulled or pushed out. So in many cases, in some of the developing countries, people are pushed out of the analog to the digital because the digital just works much better and the analog just doesn't work. But at the end of the day, it leads to more digitalization, whether it comes from the push factor or pull factor. And I think, I mean, a lot of us have lived through a long period of thinking how digitalization works, and you generally tend to feel rich countries are more digitalized. But I really urge you to read the report. If you type State of Digital Economy on Google, and you'll find this report. I used to be one of the person who used to produce these global indicators for the World Development Report, so I know how the kitchen looks like, how the sauce is made. There is a huge number of issues that a lot of these global indicators do suffer from. And there is good reason, now that I live in a developed country and see and experience, there's genuinely good intellectual reasons to actually question these numbers and look at the rankings and think of alternate ways of digitalization, which is more relevant for the global south. I think we'll be the only session today who is going to finish on time. So I'm not going to take more time, but I just wanted to thank both of you for this wonderful session. So please put your hands together for the two gentlemen here. Thank you very much.